Hey, it's Mike from ZERMELOmusic.com, and in this video, we're going to check out the bass line and patch from my track Are You Mad, which is in the Chris Lake Fisher style. And the bass line sounds like this. So starting with the written part, my goal here was to create something that felt pretty simple and powerful, but kind of intense. So you're gonna have to let me know if I succeeded. Now, one of the best ways to get that powerful, kind of aggressive feeling that I was after is to accent the downbeat. And if you don't know what the downbeat is, it is the first beat in a bar. So the first kick out of every kind of grouping of 4 kicks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That is the downbeat. And also to go after that powerful vibe, I wanted the rhythm to be really simple, kind of military style. Now there's a song that comes to mind that totally nails the vibe that I was after, and it's Dragula by Rob Zombie. So let me play that for a second. So bam, 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 bam. That was kind of what I had in mind, all right? Now, I also said that I wanted the bass line to feel a little bit intense. So we have powerful, we have simple rhythm, so a little bit intense. Now, the easiest way to create kind of tension is to start moving away from the tonic as you're playing the bass. So the tonic is just the first note in the scale. So if you're kind of just hanging out on the tonic, which is where most bass lines are going to start anyway, and you start to move away, that's going to create melodic tension. Now this sounds like a lot of words, but the ideas here are really basic, right? Just accent the downbeats, use a simple rhythm, and create some tension at the end of the phrase. So first thing we see, we're accenting here the downbeat by kind of having this isolated note. And you can see that the rhythm is pretty simple. It's just basically 8 notes after this first one. So bum, 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 bum. So kind of like that Dragula thing. And then you can see at the end of the phrase, we're moving up away from the tonic, creating that tension. That way, when we cycle back around to the next phrase, to the next downbeat, we're moving from this higher note down to the tonic again, which creates a really strong feeling. And so that's the bass line. Here at the end on the 4th phrase, I'm just adding a little turnaround phrase just to keep the bass line from getting too stale. So I want to play this again. I just want you to feel like the emphasis that we get on the downbeat and the tension that we get up here just before the downbeat. So check it out. Here we go. Now, when it comes to bass sound design, it's really about 2 things. It's about the patch and the post-processing. So let me go ahead and start with playing the patch all by itself. And then with the post-processing, so obviously a really big difference that the post-processing adds. So let's go through the bass patch, and I'm gonna just kind of rebuild it to talk through it. So I'm gonna grab massive. So we'll just start with a basic saw wave. We'll just tilt the wavetable position all the way to the right. And if we jump over to the amplitude envelope, you see that it's just really a pluck style. So we'll go ahead and bring this down just like this, and the decay is a little bit longer, it seems like, just about like that. So right now this sounds like this. And then oscillator 1 is being routed to the filter section, just a low pass 4, so we'll grab that. I'm just gonna make sure everything is routed, going to filter 1. And for the cutoff, I just wanna figure out where it sounds best at the lowest point. So I'm just gonna go ahead and set this and just kind of bring it down and see where it starts to sound good, where I can kind of stop it. So right around there, and you know, I'm kind of just looking over here, but that's how I typically will set it. So super deep there. And then this is being modulated by envelope 3. So let's just go ahead and drop that on there and see what it looks like. So a little bit of attack on there, and we'll bring the level down to about 9 o'clock, and we'll bring the decay down as well. We can see that we're kind of around the E here on delete. That looks about right. Maybe bring the attack up just a little bit more, the decay this way, something like that. And the modulation amount, we're kind of going over here till about 3 o'clock, so something like this. And And so that's really the basics of a sound. We have a saw wave being shaped by a kind of pluck style filter. Now the next major component of the sound is the tube distortion here. So Massive has 3 different kinds of distortion, and I like to figure out the best one for the sound just by simply cranking up each one and just selecting the one that sounds the best to me. Now I want this bass to have a deeper tone, and right away that teletube is giving me that deeper tone. Now that's breaking a little bit too hard, so let's just jump back over here and we will dial this back. So right there, like that sounds pretty good. And that's the basics of the sound. And now for some of the details in the bass, the first one being the noise oscillator. Now, one of the things that makes it sound a little more unique is this noise oscillator. It's just some white noise, but I've turned the color down, as you can see on the left here. So just before the 3 o'clock position, and you can see that we are modulating the amplitude of the noise with the filter envelope, and we're also routing the noise to the filter. So now with the noise, it sounds like this. So just a little bit of a scratchy texture. Now, as you can see on this synth, you can see that I'm applying an LFO to different parts in the synth. Now, one of my favorite things about Massive is the random macro. I try to put it in as many different places as I can, but in this case, I'm applying the random macro to the amplitude of an LFO, just like this. And we have a different shape. It's the noise. Let's turn the rate down and turn the restart off. Okay, so what's going on here? Basically, if I assign this LFO to something like the cutoff, right, which I do, the filter cutoff, and I open this up a little bit, what's going to happen here? Well, first thing is that because of this kind of random waveform, then this is just going to kind of be randomly going back and forth inside the cutoff just because of this waveform right here. It's going relatively slow. It's free running because I'm not having it restart, or it's not re-triggering every single time the synth receives a MIDI on message. Okay, so right away, this would kind of give you a random modulation at the cutoff. But because I'm assigning the random macro to the amplitude, it's randomly modulating this randomization. So there's a lot of random things going on. Now, aside from just applying it to the filter, we're also going to apply it to the pitch here of the oscillator, just like that. We're going to assign it to the tube amount, so just like this. And we are also applying it to the sustain level on the filter envelope. Now this is going to be barely noticeable, if not noticeable whatsoever, but it just adds a little bit of change to the bass line. And finally, I wanted this sound to get more intense over time in the track, at different parts in the track. So I assigned a macro to control different parts of the synth. And so as you can see, I had a macro control the filter cut off a little bit, opening up, letting more harmonics through. The resonance of the filter as well, so getting a slightly more harsh. We're also controlling the tube distortion, again, getting more grit and more presence in the bass. And we're also controlling the sustain level here on the amplitude envelope. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up really quick. Cool. And in setting this up, there's a couple things I overlooked. One, we just increased the resonance on the filter just a little bit. And then at the same time, we also need to increase the release on the bass just a little bit. But other than that, it's pretty close. And now what I want to do is just show you what it sounds like as I increase this macro just inside the synth. So here we go. Check it out. And so the way that I like to determine how much a macro controls different parameters in the synth is simply by cranking it all the way up and then figuring out the maximum value for that parameter. So for example, let's look at the resonance knob. I have the macro all the way up, and the question is, well, how much do I want that macro to affect the resonance? Well, I just need to set the maximum value here, and this is the maximum value that I liked. Now, if I turn this all the way up, you're going to see maybe that's a little bit too much, right? That's a little ridiculous. And so I would just need to dial it back to taste. Now, that's a little bit aggressive. We're getting there, though. So right around there, it's aggressive, it's harsh, it's angry. That's what I want it to be. I want it to be intense. But at the bottom, it sounds good too. So as I kind of sweep through, I like what I hear. Cool. Now you can see throughout the song that I have indeed automated that macro. And in particular, you can see the B sections of the drop. I wanted the drop to get more intense over time. So that's exactly what I did. I automated accordingly. And if you remember, one of the things that we automated with the macro is the sustain level on the amplitude envelope. And since the sustain level is increased, if I lengthen the MIDI notes, I can get a really aggressive and constant bass presence. So at the start of some of the drops, especially at the last drop here, you'll see that I have lengthened the first note here, and you can see that the macro value is all the way at the top. So we're getting a really, really aggressive sound here.
Are you mad?
And then it just kind of falls back. Now you can see at the end though, I wanted the bass to be a little bit more intense. So you can see the macro value is a little bit higher through the drops, through the last drop, a little bit through the third drop here. And then in the beginning, it's pretty much just flat in the beginning. And so that's just kind of trying to make things more intense as the track develops. And one more thing to point out, at the end of the strip drop section, you can see that I have basically legatoed all the MIDI. And so this just lets the bass take full advantage of the macro. So it just gets super intense as the filter opens, as the tube distortion pushes further, and as the sustain level on the amplitude envelope increases, this is just gonna get fuller and fuller and fuller and fatter until all of a sudden it just completely drops out in the break section. So that was one of the effects that I tried to create with that macro as well. And so that's basically it for the patch. Pretty simple though, right? So we have a saw wave going into a filter, a little bit of distortion, some weird kind of analog-esque kind of randomization, and then a little bit of noise, and then of course just using a macro to make the bass kind of change in sound and intensity over time in different parts of the track. So let's A/B the post-processing really quick again. So this is before. So pretty big difference. The first thing is the radiator from Sound Toys. It just gives an incredible roundness to the low end. I'm cranking the bass here, turning down the treble just a little bit, but let's go ahead and A/B this just so you can hear the difference. Hear that huge low end push? It sounds like there's just air being pushed at you because the low end is so intense. So I love this thing. And then next up we have Pro Q, and it's my attempt to emulate what the Voice of God hardware is doing, and UAD has an emulation of that hardware. And basically what I gathered is that it's a steep high-pass filter with a narrow resonant bump, and you can change the amplitude of the bump. So as you can see here, I've macroed it so I can find a frequency that sounds good, and I can boost the crap out of the amp here, try to sweep around and find a nice place to boost the low end, and then just dial the amplitude back a little bit. So let's go back a couple steps here. And then at the top here, just doing a low pass filter, again with a resonant bump, just bringing out some of those upper harmonics. So before and after this Voice of God, let's check it out. So you can hear that's really where a lot of the bass sound is coming from. Let's A/B these two plugins actually because they're doing a lot. Check it out. Very cool. Next up is the Solid EQ from Native Instruments, and this is an SSL G channel and E channel switchable here emulation. I'm using the G channel, and here I'm just pushing the low frequencies around 90 hertz about, and then the low mid frequencies here around 320. So just boosting the tone of the bass a little bit, and again giving a little bit more push to the low end. So let's go ahead and A/B this. Now, I don't really use this EQ very much, but I tried it and it sounded really, really good in the low end. So I definitely kept it on. Definitely something I'm going to be looking at in the future too. And then here we have L2. This is just putting a ceiling on the sound, bringing the sound up a little bit, making sure that the bass is constantly stable, constantly present, and forward in the mix. Next up, we have some low pass filtering that we can see the automation of. Here, just automating at different parts in the track, And then here we have this crazy chain of side chains. Now these first two here are pretty typical for me, pretty standard. This one is moving the bass out of the way of the kick transient, and then the second one here is defining the interaction basically between the kick and the bass, defining the groove, how the bass kind of recovers after the kick, and just literally drawing it in here. And this third one is kind of weird, but I probably just put this in at a later time than these first two, because maybe I just didn't want to mess with these two here. But this again is just maybe moving a little bit more of the bass out of the way from the kick transient. And then lastly, I'd love to just put the standard sidechain compression on and use the kick as the trigger, because then I'm actually imprinting the dynamics of the kick onto the bass. So that just makes me feel good. I feel like it's more of an organic interaction between the kick and the bass, because the bass is actually responding in a real way to the kick in the track. So I like that, and it's never very much. Check this out. So barely even anything going on here, but you know, it makes me feel better. And finally, the bass leaves this whole chain and goes into the low end group. So let's go ahead and check that out. Now the lows group has one purpose, and that's to try to inch the kick and the bass forward and forward and forward in the mix, just 1% by 1%. And so each of these things is going to be very, very subtle, but the cumulative effect is totally noticeable. So let me go ahead and play before and after of all of the group plugins, then I'll kind of describe what each of them are doing. So here we go. So you can hear everything just being brought forward in the mix there. And so first up is Pro Q. And this is just boosting the bottom of the kick and the bass. And we're also bringing out a little bit of the attack on the kick as well. We're also making the sound completely mono by taking out any side information below 150 Hertz from the kick and the bass. And next we have the Oxford Inflator. We're just barely pushing this about 10-12% here. And the curve is a little bit below, so we're darkening the sound a little bit, and we're just introducing just a little bit of that effect. This is just pushing things a little bit more, extremely subtle. But in the context of the mix, if it just brings it out even 1 or 2% more, then it's worth it. Now this compressor is kind of exaggerating the relationship between the kick and the bass, the dynamic relationship. You can see I'm letting the kick through by having a slow attack, 40 milliseconds. It's definitely letting that kick transient through. But this relatively fast release is making sure that the bass doesn't completely disappear, doesn't get over compressed. And so this compressor is really just emphasizing the pump between the kick and the bass that was really defined by the sidechain processors we just looked at. And next we have the MV2 doing some upward compression, which is my favorite trick to use on low-end sounds. It's just bringing up the tail of the kick, and the rumble from the radiator on the bass just really just lifts that low end. And finally we have L1 here, just putting a ceiling on the sound. Not doing anything, just clipping anything that goes over 0. Sweet, so I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of the bass writing, the bass patch, and the bass processing. Don't forget that you can download the samples from this track for free. The download link is in the description below this video. But while you are downloading your free samples, leave a comment below letting everyone know your secret sauce for bass processing. If you have any secrets, let us know. Enlighten us. We'd love to hear it. And I will see you in the next video.